there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining once again. We are in, I believe it's episode number 5 now of Cloud Gaming Notes. So that means we've been doing this for 5 months, 5 episodes. So thanks for the support. Thanks for joining in once again here. And I hope you're enjoying the content. And you know what to do. If you do like it, go ahead, hit that like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe, because it helps us know the type of content that you like. So what we'll be talking about today is slightly different from some of the previous content. We've been playing games alongside. We've looked at people who have built games using things like PlayFab. We've talked about concepts like LiveOps, for example, and building games as services. And we're going to make it a little more relevant today in thinking about the year that we've had over the past year. Of course, it's been a strange year for everyone. We've had COVID-19 impacting the way that everyone works. So we want to take a bit of time reflecting on that and thinking about really how game developers, game studios are actually able to keep going with producing games here, because we've still had game releases to keep us busy. Gaming has, of course, been on the rise, where people have been finding entertainment, not being able to socialize with each other. So if anything, there's more pressure on game companies to keep going. So once again, joined by Lee Williams as we go ahead and talk about this topic today. So let's go ahead and bring Lee into the discussion. And good afternoon, good morning, Lee.
Good morning, Chris. How you doing?
All good, thank you. How are you, sir? All well?
Yeah, very good, thank you. All well.
Good.
Calling in from a very wet, rainy Seattle.
Dare I say it's actually sunny here in the UK. That is like abnormal, you know that, but not normal.
There we go.
Oh, good. I think a few times we've called you've had the sun, so we can switch around for a change.
Yeah, sunny first, we're back.
Absolutely.
Back to business as usual here in Seattle.
So I guess we mentioned in the intro there, we'll be covering a slightly different topic, not gaming directly, but more that halo of actually producing games, right? Because I think the past year has been a challenge for everyone, not least for game developers, game studios who have actually had to keep that momentum going and somehow keep their development teams in sync and actually keep builds and releases going out. So, what are your thoughts on that? Where should we start there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to actually look at the actual discipline of game development. There's a couple of different perspectives to look at, right? One, game development is an incredibly collaborative exercise, especially on those large-scale games. You're always kind of leaning over your peer's shoulder, reviewing an artwork design, listening to music, soundtracks, looking at the storyboard, reiterating, playing it out, maybe scrapping it, going back, maybe what we whiteboarded didn't make sense when we play the game. So they're typically behaviors or actions that are done in person because it's more quick and reactive. And the other aspect to look at as well is, even in the aspect of game development, you're playing with huge, enormous files, which are, incredibly detailed renders and so forth. So putting those back out into the cloud, bring them back down, sharing them back to your peers to work on as well. The whole process of building games remotely, let's call it, rather than being in a single destination is incredibly challenging and enough to test anyone's patience. So understanding and seeing how game creators have adapted to working remotely, leveraging cloud services and the capabilities there to kind of overcome some of those bottlenecks. I don't think you'll ever iron it out fully, but definitely making significant strides to improving that process.
Gotcha. And there was a subtle word that you used in there, but I want to pull out, which is game creators, right? And I guess I said game developers earlier, but I think it's a really good call that actually it's not just about the development. There's obviously the design side, the artwork, the engineering of any back ends that are needed. For example, it's not just about coding the core game mechanics itself and all of that. So there's so many moving parts to coordinating all of this, and even from the, I guess, studio leads, if you're a big studio or even an indie developer, for example, you still need to have that plan and coordination amongst all that as well. So I think there's probably a few different ways we can approach this discussion. So maybe let's talk about maybe a few different silos or key areas. So thinking about firstly the collaboration side that you mentioned a bit earlier, and being able to have that review over the shoulder, or being able to have that, here's some artwork that I've made, what do you all think of that kind of thing? What are maybe some of the things to consider there? I guess in the development world, we would think of tools like GitHub or Azure DevOps, where you can
Yeah.
store your code in a central location, for example, and then you can go peer review as part of that process, have your cycles all set up and whatnot. There's, of course, tools like Teams and Zoom and many other things where we can actually have calls like we are right now and discuss. But maybe for some of those other areas like design and artwork and whatnot, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects of looking at it. There's the aspect where, with the level of fidelity that we have in response times from data centers nowadays, and the low requirements of actually an at-home data connection to support that, we're seeing a growing trend. It's not significant yet, but it is definitely growing, especially accelerated by COVID, of actually building and designing your game in a cloud. That
Hmm.
game, that artwork, that design isn't being built on your device. It's being built on a computer and a server in the cloud. So that never really has to download to your individual or your home network or
Hmm.
your PC to iterate on it locally and then put it back into the cloud, which wastes a lot of time in downloading and uploading. It builds upon kind of the X Cloud, the Google Stadia kind of concept, which is it's all just computed in the cloud. And what you're consuming through your kind of device and screen is a video stream, which again goes back to that concept of you don't need a great internet connection to do this. Enough that would sustain just to be able to input and iterate on that. And given the fact it's in the cloud, like a multiplayer server in a game, a number of people can play on that design and iterate on it at the same time. And so seeing that coming to the forefront is really interesting. And like you said as well, in instances where you aren't building your game in the cloud, the extension of services beyond that, which we would think of as kind of those core development services you mentioned, GitHub, Azure in general, actually, but also kind of a plethora of other services. I'm just trying to think of them off the top of my head. There's so many of them, but like it's actually going into Teams. You wouldn't normally kind of think of Teams or Zoom or some of those other kind of video conferencing services as being kind of there to support game development. There's a number of features. For example, in Teams, as you present a video now, you can include the audio stream from your PCs.
Yep.
You don't have that kind of interaction of, hey, what do you think of this video? And everyone's like, it's quiet. There's the kind of little, very subtle kind of integrations which are being included. And that's all as a result of the increase of scope of use of the services. It's gone from just having a teleconversation to having, hey, I'm presenting some video and artwork. And actually Teams needs to extend beyond that. And similarly, Zoom and other services are catching up in that area too.
No, absolutely. And you got my mind wandering earlier, actually, when you mentioned about things like xCloud and Stadia and whatnot. That obviously right now, really, they're services for consumers, right? And they're services for consumers to go and play on. But there's no far realms, right, where you couldn't have a service where actually game creators go and rally around games which aren't released yet and have that as a service for them to iterate and build over and push out releases there. So that's a really interesting concept, actually. And I think it plays back into that DevOps concept, right, that we mentioned a bit earlier, that you want to be able to go from ideation into build into release and quickly iterate over that as quickly as you can. And I think regardless of the tools that you're using there, what it all comes down to is how you can go and plan and coordinate amongst a team, right? And that's fundamentally what makes the success, because you're going to have the designers, the developers, as we said earlier, back-end architects, you're going to have gameplay testers, you're going to have so many different moving parts that you don't want any bottlenecks along the system, especially if you've got, again, we've used it in examples before, but games like Sea of Thieves, right, where they now have this kind of season-based concept, so they are time-bound in terms of getting their releases out and keeping that momentum. So I think first off is making sure that you've been able to coordinate all of that work across your team. So things like Azure DevOps are a great way of doing that, because you can roll up things from epics and user stories and individual tasks and bugs and whatnot. Sure, you could use Planner and other things, but I think number one, have something, right, to go and plan all of that work out and assign and delegate.
Yeah, and I think as with anything, like, I mean, I don't mean to kind of use COVID-19 in this sense, but it forms a catalyst, right? It breaks the status quo of kind of everything that was seen as being normal. And I can't share in great detail, but the services in terms of Azure, where that kind of at scale, being able to kind of essentially buy compute, but not to do kind of huge kind of processing of, like, I'm just giving an example in healthcare, processing of huge algorithms and projects and data, just to kind of just compute it. It's actually kind of almost, how do you allocate compute resources on the day? Like, I just need this huge ability to just do computing for this day as an individual on my game. Okay, close it down, done now, next day.
Yeah.
And although that's great, that helps me build and do that remotely. But even if we didn't have the pandemic, the cost savings and efficiencies to, it's exactly where server farms are built on, right? You look back in the days of Amazon, all this huge excess capacity they had in server load to service their retail business that, outside of peak they didn't use, but they had to have it for that peak. Well, as a business and, as a game creator, if I just need that huge compute resource on a couple of occasions, why do I have to invest in this incredibly expensive hardware to do that, but I'm only using it for a handful of times? And so that's an interesting trend that was triggered by, I would say, the remote working initiative, where people, to that point, I need that compute resource to iterate in the cloud, because this factors like download speed or whatever that doesn't make it possible to do it on my native device, or even take that device from the office because I can't get the office. Well, hey, this is a great concept. Why don't we just do this anyway? Why don't we just have this a bit of compute I can just pull up and scale as I need it, and then send it back off, and just have that as an individual resource. So there's a couple of really kind of interesting aspects being born out of kind of game creation remotely.
You mentioned there about really scaling things and spinning things up on demand, right? And it's really refreshing every so often to be reminded of that, because day in, day out, what I do is I talk about this stuff, right? So it's just taken for granted. But yeah, in that scenario where you're a game creator and you've got that investment of infrastructure maybe in your on-premises environments, and now suddenly you have to send everyone home, that could be considered sunk cost at that point, because you need to, maybe you can't access it for whatever reason. But the flexibility and the agility and just the ability now, and the way that you can, as you say, right, you can now go ahead and remotely work with each other. So basic as a concept, but actually so powerful. And it's really good just to remind ourselves of that actually once in a while.
Yeah, and you say something there, remotely, which I feel is a way to describe, well, hey, I'm working remotely because of COVID. But actually, one of the things we're seeing at the moment is, game development tends to be hubs, right? You kind of find there are centers around the world where there are hubs of game development. We've run, Seattle is one of those, tons of studios here, Vancouver as well, with the coalition. But actually, talent, if you want to attract certain talent that may not be where you are in the world, you now have technology and infrastructure in place that removes the need of, I have to bring people to this location because, building games is one of those things that's best done in person, to being, well, we can do this anywhere. And it's not really reliant on a very strong internet connection or infrastructure. We have the services in place. So if I was a kind of a game publisher, game studio, and I think about, where do I address my talent pool, I no longer have to think within geographical location. I can also now just think, well, hey, wouldn't it be great if, I'm in Vancouver and in Central Eastern Europe, someone's working on my soundtrack overnight. So when I wake up in the morning, it's done. So as I think of my own product cycles in my local time, my studio is producing 24/7. And I think the ability to do that is incredible in terms of, increasing speed, iteration to market, acquiring talent pools where, you aren't. I think it's great. I think it's such a diversification and an empowerment broadly of kind of creation in all aspects.
Yeah, and there's a side benefit, right, for not just the studios, but then the individuals who are going to be involved there as well, right? And the analogy I'll give here, just to make it really concrete, is thinking about the kind of technical meetup communities that exist around the world. So I run a meetup group here in Reading, Azure Thames Valley. I've presented at numerous events, like the night before last, I was presenting to DevOps Knots, so Nottingham, middle of the country.
Nice.
A couple of weeks ago, I was presenting to a group based across, I believe it's Norway, I think. And I think this is the thing, right, is even a few weeks before that, there was a global Azure virtual conference. So you had people from all across the world being able to do presentations and present to each other. And taking that analogy back to what you were saying there, Lee, I think as an individual game developer or a cloud engineer or DevOps engineer or whatever discipline you're in, and if you're looking to grow the skills and grow the career in that space, maybe you've got that background in cloud or background in game development or whatnot, but the opportunities aren't local. Maybe this is the time where you can go and widen your market and your pool of influence. I don't know if that's the right word or right term, but you get what I'm getting at there, right? There's more opportunity there now.
Yeah, and something you say about more opportunity there as well. I mean, I work on the Azure marketing team specifically for game development. I think when you look at the pre-pandemic world, it's kind of interesting now to look at it. It was a lot of very geographical based events. You know, you had GDC in San Francisco, Gamescom Cologne, E3 in LA, and a lot of these events around the world. And you know, a lot of the feedback we had from a number of game creators is, you know, either my company won't pay for me to travel, or you know, it's too much effort or it's too much expense. You know, everyone knows when you go to E3 or GDC, or even staying in San Francisco on an off-peak moment is outrageously expensive.
Yep.
And so new features like in Teams or webinars, and the ability to kind of conduct events digitally. More so, events are of value for networking. You know, being able to connect with peers, share what they're working on, acquire talent for the game you're working on, and seeing how technology has enabled, I would say, vast proportion. I'd go as far as saying almost 75% of the capabilities of things we did in person. Obviously, connection, emotion, as with most things, just isn't there. But the ability to kind of have side groups, to have forums, to host those kind of conversations and networking capabilities, the event content dissemination, the interaction with event content. You take it for granted, but pre-pandemic, I mean, a lot of these features just weren't there. There was no need to invest and put resources as an organization into those features. And now they're there. It's tremendous just to see kind of what you were saying, outside of just game creation, but learning about game creation, the resources available, the shift in investment to digital and free learning. That's incredible as well. That there's no pay barrier of a hotel and a plane ticket. A lot of this is actually just free. And I feel like just that ability to disseminate learning and resources, and what that kind of has done for the game creator community is amazing.
It comes down to accessibility and inclusion, doesn't it? Because I think at that point, and again, something, as we say, right, I hadn't really appreciated, but now we're talking about it, we kind of pull it out here, that, the cost of those things is not insignificant, and it is going to be a barrier of entry to many people. I attended, I can't remember which conference it was, but there was, I think it was one of the PlayFab ones, maybe last month or so. And there was loads of great content there, talking about how you can go and use PlayFab, for example, for the back-end multiplayer services, talking about game and accessibility in gaming, and numerous kind of different types of talks that maybe in a world where COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't have been able to do that, because, I'm not able to fly halfway across the world for a conference of something that interests me as a topic and isn't directly my day job, right? And I think for lots of people, that's going to be a similar case as well.
Yeah, totally agree. It'll be interesting to see how much of it comes back in the future. I think obviously there will be aspects of it, but I hate to reiterate the phrase "the new normal," but I do think this has, like, as somebody who'd be interested in game creation, why on earth would I want to endorse a world where I have to pay thousands of pounds and dollars and euros to go and travel to events again, where I can get this content free with almost the same level of fidelity of interaction and engagement? I mean, it's again, it's a catalyst for change, right?
I mean, having having said all that, though, the one thing that you did mention a bit earlier that I think not is missing, but is certainly different and definitely needed when the world kind of resumes to some level of normality, is the networking side of things, right? Like, I'd love at some point, whatever, the next time I'm back in Seattle, for us to film one of these in person, right? And be able to just have a literal conversation on a sofa and have one of those things. Or, be able to go to a conference and speak with people about how they've built a game, or have that coffee chat or whatever it is. And it's some of that connection, that personal side, I think we've not lost. It's still there, but it's just not quite the same, is it? That connection side of it.
Yeah, there was a great show and or article, I can't remember where I saw it, maybe a few months ago, that pretty much said, when we engage in person, and this kind of feels like a bit of a digression, but it's
Mm.
super valid because when we engage in person, there's a change in our tone of voice. We're able to read someone's facial
Yep.
gestures, and all those kind of various other aspects, those kind of impassive signals we pick up on that, again, networking is bonding. You share kind of positive energy with somebody else, you kind of share kind of value exchange, and that kind of builds that bond where there's willing to share value back, you network. And it was described pretty much, kind of teleconferencing services like we're using right now. I'm predisposed that when I look at a screen, I'm looking at a video. I'm not looking at a person. So it's always kind of having to, in the back of your head, remember the person you're talking to is live,
Yep.
and to look for those gestures, which are often delayed. And that audio through a speaker often loses a lot of that kind of emotion and tone. Anyway, that comes back to, as we think about game creation and networking, as you said, being able to share feedback with somebody where you're not maybe kind of being like, oh, that's terrible, that is a really bad design. You're like, when you share that with tone and emotion, you're able to kind of steer feedback without it harming the bond in the network.
Yeah.
And it goes very deep, and I'm not going to go into all that now, but you're right. I mean, to be able to kind of interact and work like that as you would in any organization, right? It is really hard. It is challenging. And I think, this year I'd speak for a lot of people and just be like, they're ready to go back to an office to engage with their peers and to have those kind of more efficient conversations. But I do think it's important to also weigh the benefits. Whilst there are some losses of doing this, that comment we touched on earlier about talent acquisition outside of an immediate geographical location, to be able to be inclusive to those audiences that once could not access that content. The previous and now kind of realities in some of those circumstances is great. Yes, there were instances where working in person versus working here are lesser experiences, but there's been a whole load of new experiences born from this, which I feel will remain, which are great. I think they definitely outweigh the cons elsewhere, and I think it'll be exciting to see how that, in a hybrid world going forward, where there's a bit of both, accelerates kind of that learning, the game development, the networking, the ability to kind of get talent from areas and innovate in ways you haven't done before. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, I kind of see, yes, there's a trade-off in some areas, but in many others, there's a lot of positives to come out of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it also re-emphasizes and this is one of the areas I normally talk about, right? So I can get really passionate and on my high horse on this one. But things like DevOps and the importance of having some of those processes in place, and having clearly defined roles and responsibilities, and understanding what that end-to-end process looks like from we go and plan all the way to go and code and build and release. And I think for companies to keep that rhythm, that way of working throughout the last, what are we now, 17, 18 months, I guess, at this point, is really actually a big piece of it. Because if you didn't have that ability to have your automated builds, your automated deployments, that ability to look at a board of work, for example, that the team is working on, and for your executive producers or directors or however you want to call the roles within the organization, but the ability to start kind of moving cards and figuring out what needs to be in this sprint and all of these things, the house of cards falls apart at that point. You're not able to really keep that momentum at all. It really is a foundational building block of everything that we've talked about here, and keeping that momentum going, I think.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it'll be valuable to also, just to kind of build on what you were saying there, is to go back post-pandemic, hopefully, if we are able to return to a degree of normality, and then just kind of see what people's perspectives are, Yeah, it'd be interesting. I think you only can do it when you are in a different position. It's great to kind of profess it now and kind of discuss the benefits of it, but I think it'll be interesting to see what people naturally graduate to when they have the option to do it. Right now, there's not an option to do a lot of stuff, right? And so kind of when you have the option, do you kind of slide back and be like, well, all these are great benefits, but actually, you know what, I do prefer, the free beers and the free coffee that I had in the office and some of the benefits. And maybe I don't want to be in the house all day with the kids. It was a great idea to be able to work remotely, but is this a great idea? So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll also be great to see the types of games produced during pandemic. I mean, people's state of mind, and kind of meaning that not like a jest manner, but kind of being locked down, and this, the sense of kind of feeling trapped. A lot of people have said, how does that come through in terms of people's creativity in the games they build and so forth. So it'll be interesting to see what the next kind of few months of game releases as we get into kind of Q2 or Q3, Q4 of calendar year.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting perspective, and I think I'll close that last point with, as an organization, I think it's on us to think about now when we look at supporting game creators. I think we mentioned earlier, it expands beyond the scope of traditional game development tools to things like Teams, to things like, GitHub, and those other kind of ancillary services which support game development or game creation, in that kind of remote or, broader world. And how do we think about, including those together and bundling those? And I think that's definitely something that's top of mind for me. And you're looking at a full suite, I guess. Then.
Yeah, and you mentioned more the development side of the house there, right? But even the basics of things like being able to put together like a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation or something like that. And I think sometimes we take for granted just some of the great stuff we get from things like Office 365 or, Google, the Google Office suite, or, Google Suite rather, or any of the similar kind of technologies there that do all of these things. And I think we've hinted at it throughout the session, but to really put it out explicitly, that communication and that collaboration and making sure that is still there throughout that entire process in the remote world is absolutely pivotal to keeping that momentum and keeping that success going, I think.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, and it's not just going to be one tool to rule them all. I think we've talked about, right, there's been a series of tools there, and obviously we've given a flavor of those. There's many different other ones out there. These are just ones we've picked from the top of our heads here, right? But many options out there. So I guess then... go ahead, mate. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to close and add one thing. I think you said something earlier, which was, I kind of become desensitized to this. I do this every day. Same here. And even just from a job perspective, I think, cloud blends into our lives in so many ways, indiscreetly, that you don't actually acknowledge that it is the cloud there. And, we talk about the advances of, this helps game development, game creation, productivity, however you kind of slice that. But I mean, like, just looking at, little things like, the fact that we all have shared calendars nowadays, the fact that we all use kind of, Apple Notes or OneNote or Google Drive and sharing resources and various other aspects, and like what we take for granted. We are fortunate at Microsoft to have this, plethora of services available, but even available, elsewhere. It's really interesting to see how it becomes very normal very quickly, and the ability to apply those principles in other disciplines and discover whole new benefits is really interesting.
I'm just trying to remember the quote. What was it? Good technology should become indistinguishable and should become like magic or something like that. I forget the exact quote, but I think that's what he said there, right? The fact we just take all of that stuff for granted when it just works, and we can just collaborate and have this conversation halfway across the world like we're having, right? And be able to talk about things like that. So completely agree. And I think there's, to close us out here, I think there's one big area as well that maybe we can leave for a future discussion, where cloud has really gone ahead and impacted all of that. And it's really, I don't know about your perspective on it, but certainly mine is, it's almost like a new industry that is growing, is the kind of gaming entertainment and the gaming world that is coming out as a result of that. Like we spoke previously, right? And we can definitely dig into how cloud enables some of these things, but I've spent hours just watching people play Sea of Thieves on YouTube, and not because I'm trying to understand how to get better at the game, even though I definitely need to, but just how, just because it's enjoyable, it's fun. Like you can see people having fun and they're making great content, and it just pulls you in, and you kind of get sucked in. A few videos later, you realize that's like an hour of time that has gone somewhere. So it's definitely an industry which is growing and emerging, I would say.
Yeah, and you could even have another hour conversation on the back end that powers even just the video streaming services, which again is incredibly fascinating. Just the kind of the latency requirements involved there is often overlooked. But anyway, I could go down a rabbit hole with that. I'll stop there.
All good. We'll leave that for maybe next month's episode. Then we'll park that one for then.
Yep. Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Lee, thank you so much for joining again. Always some great discussions and great insights. Really appreciate you joining.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
So there we go, folks. Another of the Cloud Gaming Note sessions there. A little bit different today. No games being played in real time as we're multitasking and talking and whatnot, but really focusing on some of the challenges over the last year, some of the, obviously, the collaboration challenges that have been there and being able to work remotely. And I don't think any of us are strangers to those at the moment, but it's particularly interesting when you apply that scenario to the gaming industry, and some insights there from the pair of us talking. So again, if you like this content, let us know. Hit us with a like on YouTube, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know as soon as there's brand new content. And if there's certain areas, certain topics you'd love to hear more about, drop us a comment. Tweet us over on Twitter. You saw our handles on the screen there as well. We're both interactive. We'd love to hear what more you would like to go and hear about there. So with that, thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until next month's episode, wishing you well, and bye for now.